This is our presentation today. We call it Keep America Distracted, How Corporate PR Derails Effective Environmental Advocacy. And this is something that is kind of a tangent to my activism that I've learned and kind of deciphered over the years through different things that I've read up on and noticed. So we'll be walking through that in this presentation. And this is usually my cover slide. Energy Justice Network is a national organization. I'm the founder and executive director, and we're based in Philadelphia, but we help communities from Hawaii to New England to Florida to Oregon and lots of points in between, fighting off dirty energy and waste facilities, and also working to build alternatives in terms of zero waste and clean energy. So I want to start this with a story. This story goes back to when I was an undergrad in the 90s at Penn State University in central Pennsylvania. And there was a pickup truck that I noticed that had two bumper stickers on it. And I was surprised that the two stickers could be on the same truck. But I was more surprised about what the second sticker said, which we'll get to in a second. The first one, I couldn't find a picture that is quite it, but it basically was like this t-shirt that you see. It said, "Have you hugged a logger today?" And I'm like, wow, okay, that's a little bit brazenly anti-tree, but that's what that said. And then the other sticker just said, "Smokey needs you." And I was blown away by how not only were they on the same truck, but how that second sticker didn't have the message on it. It literally was just black and white print, "Smokey needs you." Now, what is that? What does that mean? This interactivity starts now, so feel free to unmute. What is that? What is Smokey needs you? Who is Smokey?
So Smokey the Bear, obviously needing you to help prevent forest fires, right?
Exactly, yeah. So Smokey is this bear, and we're supposed to know this just from seeing his name. And we know what it wants too. So this bumper sticker was basically, it didn't have the message on it. It was a key to unlock a message that has been in my head since childhood that says, you see the word Smokey, you know that there's this bear that wants you to do something. And that fascinated me so much because I was thinking, how much money did it take so that they don't even have to print the message on the sticker anymore? They don't even have to have the bear on their sticker anymore. It's just Smokey needs you. And it's like, yes, sir, Smokey, I know what you need me to do. That took a lot of money, right? And so it made me think, who funds Smokey the Bear? Any ideas? Who funds Smokey the Bear?
Guessing the Forest Service?
The Forest Service does, I think, co-sponsor it. But we're going to go a little deeper with this one. So the same entity that sponsors Smokey the Bear also puts out a lot of other kinds of messages. You've seen these all over the place. Don't drink and drive, pick up litter, take a bite out of crime, all sorts of things that are seemingly good messages. Who is this entity that's behind all of these? Anyone? If you have good enough resolution on your screen, you can probably see the answer in front of you.
Well, one person said the Ad Council.
Okay, I didn't see that because I can't see the chat, but thank you. So yeah, it's the Ad Council. So if you look at some of the Smokey the Bear ads, you'll see the Forest Service is there, but so is the Ad Council. So who is the Ad Council? How do they have so much money to be sponsoring all these different types of ads in so many mediums? Like, they literally brag that you have about, I think it was about 400 million impressions per year. So per person, it's about one ad a day in this country that you're seeing, whether it's a banner ad on the internet or on a bus stop or a newspaper, magazine, radio, billboards, they're everywhere. And that's how frequently we're seeing it. But a lot of my audiences, when I present them, about half the time, a room full of people can't even guess it's the Ad Council, but they see them every day on average. So who's funding the Ad Council? Where are they getting all that money?
I want to take a guess. Are they
Mhm.
taking it? Is it like a fund that's made up of fines that people have had to pay for some sort of transgression? Is what I'm thinking.
That's an interesting take on it. And I mean, it's possible that that's happened sometime, although I haven't heard of it. But what I do know, and I've seen other instances like that, so it's not out of the question, just not specifically with the Ad Council. But when I looked into it, here's the block logo. One of the first clues I had when I was still a teenager, I saw a full page ad in the Philadelphia Inquirer, and it said it now a word of thanks to our sponsors. Thanks. And it had the Ad Council block logo in the middle, but the backdrop was the small print of all these big corporations that funded them. You had Walmart and McDonald's and like everything, basically. And here's a more recent list of on their own website where they admit getting funding from these days. And you'll see all kinds of big companies, Disney and TikTok and Walmart are in there, Apple, Adobe, you name it. Meta and Google right at the top of the list there. But you've got all kinds of companies. And when I last looked at this was about a decade ago, I looked at the top 100 corporations in the US and how many of them are funding the Ad Council. And was literally half were funding the Ad Council. So this is corporate America speaking to us through the Ad Council. What are they saying? What do they want? And how do they benefit? What's the common thread between all those messages that I was showing you that they're putting out? Any ideas?
None of them are directly promoting any of the companies that support the Ad Council. That's obvious.
Right. So it's indirect.
Public interest?
Well, yeah. And we'll get a little into that in a minute in terms of their history, what started them. But what's the common thread that goes between all of them? The actual answer lies in Smokey the Bear's exact message. What is Smokey's message, word for word?
We individuals.
Only you
Only
can
you.
prevent forest fires.
Yes,
Yes.
only
Seems like
you.
it's
Yeah, it's individual action. Don't question the
Mhm.
system.
right.
Exactly. And so the most important word in that is what?
Was the phrase only you.
You're right. So only you, or just the word you is what I was going for, but only is also important. So the fact that they're saying, don't mess with us behind the curtain. We want you to be distracted in focusing on yourself. And that is actually wired into the DNA of the Ad Council, and that the campaign criteria they have, now that they're online to be able to see, but we figured this out years ago, they very deliberately will only advertise things that have solutions that are individually focused. And that is a large part of why they exist. Now, they don't want you doing what the high schoolers did when they teamed up with landfill and incinerator community activists in the late 80s and early 90s and mailed the styrofoam clamshells back to Oak Brook, Illinois, to McDonald's corporate headquarters until they stopped wrapping hamburgers in styrofoam. They are designed to prevent you from thinking that way because they want you to think it's your responsibility for having that litter on the ground. That's where your understanding of this issue needs to end. And that's why McDonald's funds the Ad Council. And also, we'll get into a minute, Keep America Beautiful. So when I was reading one of my favorite books of all time, it's Toxic Sludge is Good for You. That initially, this book wasn't even about sewage sludge. They came up with that chapter after they got contacted by the Water Environment Federation, which sounds nice, saying, can you rename your book? And they're like, well, who are you? And it turned out to be the Sewage Sludge Lobby. So they have a chapter on that now. But it's all about the public relations industry. And it's just mind-blowing seeing what's in there. The very preface to it gripped me because it talked about the dancing raisins, the commercials that they had when I was a kid that were the first to use claymation on TV. And they actually got free TV coverage through the news covering the commercials because the commercials were using this innovative claymation technology at the time. And my parents were like, Mikey, check this out. There's dancing raisins on TV. And I was like, okay. And I thought it was neat. But reading this book and just the intro telling me that that was there to distract me from the boycott that the United Farm Workers had on the grape industry in California because of the labor conditions, and that they had dancing raisins on TV to distract me from something I had no hope of even knowing about. Corrupting my childhood was something that I just thought was innocent at the time. So that's how I didn't put the book down. I just tore right through it. I was like, wow, and it goes through one industry at a time. And one of the things in there, it talks a little bit in there about the Ad Council and how at the beginning of their existence, there was this threat that there could be a national tax on advertising. TV was new to people, and they were like, what are these ads that we have to watch between things? And so there's this threat of a national tax on that. Now, today, that would be like lefty, commie, pinko, crazy talk, but the idea at the time, was a reasonable part of the political dialogue. And so the Ad Council was formed to fight back against that. They were formed in order to show that advertising can be used for good things. And so they started creating public service announcements focused on individual behavior, so they can show that advertising shouldn't be punished by a tax because it could be used for good. Now, shortly after they started, within weeks, the war broke out. And they actually changed their name to the War Advertising Council, which you'll see at the bottom of these ads. And Rosie the Riveter, which a lot of people still point to and remake into memes, emphasizing liberation for women, was actually the co-opting of feminism for the war by the Ad Council. That was the origin of that image that we still use in other contexts. We see other ads that came from that time with the War Advertising Council. Buy war bonds, loose lips, sink ships were other famous campaigns of theirs. And then after the war was over, they switched back to just being the Advertising Council or the Ad Council without the focus on militarism, except that they still will run military recruiting type of ads as the Ad Council, as well as their general ads that just try to tell us, do good things and focus on yourself. Now, the Ad Council is also teamed up with Keep America Beautiful. And I'm sure you all remember or have heard of the Crying Indian commercials where the Italian guy was pretending to be an indigenous person and complaining about or being sad about there being litter in the environment. Well, you'll see right here at the beginning, Keep America Beautiful and Ad Council were tag teaming on that one, as they have continued to do in recent years, talking about benches wanting to be recycled and supporting the notion of plastics recycling, which is now quite controversial. And Keep America Beautiful itself is a little bit controversial. They might seem like motherhood and apple pie in this country, but in some circles, folks have kind of figured them out and realized that they're a bit of a problem. And the first clue I had of that was in the early 90s when Greenpeace put out a guide to anti-environmental organizations. And Keep America Beautiful was listed in there. And I noticed in this that not only were they doing things like defending incineration, but they were opposing a bottle bill, which is basically one of the main things you can do to help make sure cans and bottles get recycled is to put that little fee on them, and then you get it back when you actually recycle it. Well, the companies that were funding and still are, for the most part, funding Keep America Beautiful are the waste and packaging industries and the companies that make the things that end up being litter. So you got RJR Nabisco, which is now Altria, making the cigarettes that are a lot of ways in litter. You've got the two biggest waste corporations in the world, Waste Management and Browning Ferris, are both funders and were on their board. They're no longer on the board though, nor can I find them in their funding list, but the other kinds of companies are. You also have Burson Marsteller, which is highly featured in the Toxic Sludge is Good For You book because they're one of the notorious public relations firms that's used to combat environmentalists and all sorts of things, human rights groups, and basically every bad thing they can run PR for. They're one of the shadier outfits out there as far as that goes. Now, Keep America Beautiful's position on bottle bills was very controversial at the beginning when they initially in the 70s opposed California's bottle bill. And they realized that that was a little bit too self-serving to go over well. And so they basically dropped having any official position on the issue and would just start talking in terms of promoting alternatives to bottle bills instead. But in 2021, it seemed like they were coming around. They actually put out a report that provides real data about how states with bottle bills, they call them container deposits sometimes, have about twice as much, states without those bills have twice as much litter as bottle bill states. So in other words, you have a bottle bill, you'll have a lot less litter. That's a good thing. And it was basically a big shot in the arm to those who are promoting bottle bills. They might think, oh, Keep America Beautiful is okay now. However, more recently, just in 2022, the Conservation Law Foundation has testified, pointing out that the companies underlying Keep America Beautiful are still lobbying against bottle bills in Rhode Island, in Massachusetts, and Connecticut. So they're on the face with Keep America Beautiful trying to remain neutral as best they can, but really the corporate entities behind it are still vigorously opposed to it. And this is who's behind it. These are the funders of Keep America Beautiful. You'll see of their largest donors, 3 of them are actually represented on their board of directors. Reynolds being the aluminum company, so aluminum cans, Dow Chemical with the plastics production, Anheuser-Busch with soda bottles and cans, and other companies here that largely are the ones making the litter. The cigarette butts that are a lot of litter is Altria now, it used to be R.J. Reynolds. And more tobacco here as well. So it's clear that there's a conflict of interest, that these companies are funding these in order to get you to focus on anything other than their responsibility. And the waste industry, even though they're not directly on the board or funding Keep America Beautiful that I can find anymore, they're still partnering with them on the very same types of activities, with America Recycles Day, with Waste Management, or now just WM, the biggest waste corporation in the world. This one also partnered with Keep America Beautiful in Pennsylvania as the Republic, which is the second largest waste corporation that used to be Browning First Industries that you saw on an earlier slide. So they're still doing the same things. They're just a little bit standing apart from each other in some ways. Now, on Keep America Beautiful's page, you also see a heavy focus on individual action. You'll see they have a whole individual action center on their website where it focuses on what you can do, including planting trees now is something that is part of what they're doing. Now, I'm not against individual action. I was actually inspired when I saw that Lawrence Singer produced about 1 mason jar's worth of trash in 2 years. And a friend of mine produces about 1 pound of trash a year, having fought incinerators, and was just a personal saint himself in doing that. So I was like, I wonder how good I am. And I decided to test it for a year. And every 3rd month, I would collect all my trash in a Ziploc bag. In January, you can see my bag was a little bigger than the other months. That's because I looked at it and I encourage everyone to do this. It just helps make visible things. And not that this is the answer to everything. That's actually the opposite of the point of this presentation. But it can train us into better habits and learning systemic ways to then fix things. So with that first month, I'm like, why is my bag so big? And I was like, well, that toilet paper I bought in the big plastic wrapper is a big chunk of what's in there. And so I was thinking, well, gee, I know there are places that sell that wrapped in paper, which I can recycle, unlike this plastic. So I switched what I purchased after having noticed that, which I wouldn't have otherwise seen if I didn't collect it in a bag that made it more visible to me. So that's one thing you can do that just helps make the problem more understandable. But that was only possible because I had options to buy my food at a farmer's market and to have other food delivered to me in like a box that would come to my door every week from a local farm, where a lot of packaging is from food. And if you don't have those options, you might not be able to do as good of a job. I also had composting available where I was living. And so that made it easy to not have a lot of food waste. Otherwise, this experiment would have become very stinky very fast. So it's not enough, though, to be personal saints about it when our neighbors are doing things like this and putting out like 10 bags a week or something. That obviously me solving my problem is not going to change my neighbors being like this. So we need more systemic solutions to things. Now, one of the things I remember reading, and I think this is also in that Toxic Sludge is Good for You book, it was talking about Dennis Hayes, who coordinated the first Earth Day back in 1970. And he gave a fiery speech about how we're not going to let the corporations turn our movement into a pick up their litter movement. I really encourage you to read his speech because I think it's pretty powerful, and I finally got to read the whole thing recently. But he's talking about when it comes to salvaging the environment, the individual is almost powerless. You can pick up litter, and if you're diligent, you may be able to find some returnable bottles, but you are forced to breathe the lung-corroding poison which companies spew into the air. You simply can't live an ecologically sound life in America. That's not one of the options open to you. Go shopping and you find dozens of laundry products. It seems like a tremendous array until you know that most are made by 3 companies, and the differences in cleaning power are almost negligible. And he goes on to say, we are tired of being told that we're to blame for corporate depredations. Political and business leaders once hoped that they could turn the environmental movement into a massive anti-litter campaign. They have failed. And yet here we are this many years later. I'm not sure they failed. The entry points for most people that get involved in the environmental movement is picking up litter, planting trees, adopting a cow, renting an acre, whatever, all the different like sponsor a whale kind of things that are out there, but not things that change the system. These are campaigns that we're taught are the entry points to getting involved. And we're taught that because they're not threatening the companies that fund things like Keep America Beautiful, that fund things like Project Learning Tree, which I found is a very common curriculum teaching school students about forests, but it was written by the logging industry. Or Water Education for Teachers, WET, which is a water education curriculum that is used in high schools, written by hydroelectric dams and PepsiCo and Coca-Cola that own, and Nestle that own bottled water companies. So it's like all the major environmental education that is coming into classrooms anymore, and this is not just recently, this has been going on for decades, is funded by corporate entities that have a conflict of interest, which makes it very understandable then when my first entry points to getting involved were things that don't really make a difference. So let's take this a little deeper. One of the things I had to read when I was a sociology undergrad, I had a class on race and ethnic relations and had to read this book called A Different Mirror, A Multicultural History of the United States. And one of the things that really fascinated me was that this divide and conquer strategy goes way back to the early days of this country. We had plantation owners that would literally racially divide their workforces in order to pit one group against another by treating one worse than the other. So they would fight each other instead of fighting their bosses. In Hawaii, this was so deliberate. Excuse me. It was so, sorry. It was so deliberate that plantation owners were sending memos to each other saying, have this percentage of Japanese, this percentage of Filipinos, and situate them like this, so that literally one group was defecating on the other. They had the managers' homes on the top of the hills, and then one group living above the other, where with no sewer systems, literally, I think the expression "the shit rolls downhill" might have come from this example, but that's what they were socially engineering, so that the workers that were starting to organize against their plantation owners would then fight each other. So you see this today in so many dimensions. You see this really spelled out in the Republican campaigns. Not that the Democrats are immune, they do a good bit of this themselves, but especially see this from the likes of Trump, where you have all kinds of division being sowed so that people are not organizing in the one way in which we outnumber the people in charge. So we have corporate mass media, social media, politicians distracting and dividing us along all the lines possible. It's race, gender, sexuality. Trans issues are now a hot button way of dividing people, but they'll do it along citizenship and language, religion, political party loyalty. Even sports teams I see as a way of dividing people and getting them ganged up into teams to fight each other. Guns and abortion as wedge issues. And even class lines, it's socially sanctioned to divide people along class lines, as long as it's the middle class hating the poor or immigrants. But as soon as you start talking in terms of 1% versus the bottom 99%, that's when it's such a controversial, toxic thought form that Obama's FBI has to coordinate crackdowns on Occupy camps to prevent that movement from moving forward, which is what happened. And right now you have tech companies increasingly polarizing people and reports being written on that as well. So what's fascinating to me about the Ad Council strategy is that it takes this strategy of division and brings it down to the individual level, which is what makes it so insidious, so that we're not just divided among each other in group identities, but we're dividing down to the individual, where we're thinking the cause of social problems and therefore the solution to social problems is individual behavior. And that is what's so damaging, I think, to our movement, when people get stuck in that rut and aren't thinking in terms of what systems need to change and how do I work with other people to make that happen. So essentially, Ad Council is saying, don't be effective and fight our corporate sponsors to change. Go ahead, recycle, pick up litter, plant trees, focus on you. You are the cause of social problems. You're the solution, not us. Thank you. Stay divided. Now, I was a little surprised when I looked up this quote to see who actually wrote it, but it was at the beginning of the founding of the United States, when Benjamin Franklin was the one to say, if we don't hang together, we shall surely hang separately. And we see that division and the need to fight it very present in our political system today. So let's look at what are the ways to get to the root of the problem, to actually fix the system properly. We'll start with looking at waste issues for a moment, since we're a little bit focused on that here. So first of all, we need to take the focus off of individual change and put it on institutions. That doesn't mean that we're not going to bring our bag to the supermarket and bring our reusable cutlery and our bottled water to things and have people serve ourselves in our own container at restaurants instead of using takeout containers. You know, I do all these things and I hope you all do too. But we're not going to change people one at a time. When corporations are out there changing them millions at a time with advertising, we can't keep up that way. So we need to have campaigns that we focus on where we're getting those institutional changes made, but doing the individual changes as kind of a side thing that we learn in the course of being inspired in this work, but not have the work be focused on individual change. We can mass produce individual change by getting institutional changes. The education that encourages individual change can be facilitated through publicly funded programs that educate people on a mass scale, but also provide the tools and incentives to do it. So if you're telling people recycle, but they don't have a recycle bin, or compost and they don't have any place to do it, you know, that's an institutional change that needs to happen. Then you can tell people how to do it, make sure they do it right, and give them the right financial incentives to make sure they do it. But if you don't fix the system first, you can't really facilitate the mass individual change that we need. And this cuts across a lot of different issues. If you're talking about, you know, drive an electric car, well, a lot of us can't afford electric cars, but we need to make sure that all cars are cleaner electric type of cars, but also that we don't need cars as much and we have mass transit and other options that don't require people to travel as much. So all the solutions, they need to be systemic ones, not just relying on people who are more affluent to be able to fund different choices in their lives when it might cost more to do so. So a lot of other angles on this. I'm happy to come back to this if you want to ask me what some of these other bullet points are about, because there's a whole other set of workshops there. But in terms of getting to the root of other problems, the same principles apply. Instead of feeding hungry people, which, I shouldn't say instead of, in addition to, we need to do this too. But we also need to make sure that there aren't hungry people. We need to be ending poverty, housing the homeless, making sure housing is affordable. Instead of people having GoFundMes for medical bills, we need to have universal single payer healthcare. Instead of the things that involve paying for things that might cost more, we need to make sure that they don't cost more, and actually the bad options aren't even options. All food should be organic. All food should be healthy and safe to eat. All electricity that's provided should be not using combustion of any sort, or nuclear or other forms of dirty energy. And we can make that happen through systemic change, not asking one person at a time to sign up to pay more for wind or solar power, which shouldn't even cost more at this point. Even things like the Don't Drive Drunk campaigns, not that we're going to perfectly solve that with institutional changes, but providing free and public transportation at relevant hours when people might be coming back from bars is one piece of solving that problem that doesn't rely just on shifting individual behavior. And one of the things that really baffled me when I was speaking at a college in Boston years ago, the students there were trying to do the individual approach to recycling at their campus. They were frustrated by the fact that their campus wasn't recycling. They said they didn't have space to put recycling bins in their institution. So the students were collecting recyclables, and at night they would sneak them into recycling bins on the curbs of a neighborhood that was somewhere else in the city, and trying not to get caught. And I was just, my mind was just exploding from this idea, because I'm like, why are you trying not to get caught? Because how sustainable is this? How many years is your group going to sustain doing the institution's job for them by sneaking the stuff into people's recycling bins? That was just crazy stuff. So I'm like, you need to do this and call the Boston Globe over and get a front page article showing how your school is not doing its job and is being irresponsible and is driving you to do something this ridiculous to even address this problem, and embarrass the school into doing its job. And then you'll get institutional change that you need. So let's talk about what the word radical means for a second. And I have a couple clues on here on this slide. So it's a chance to unmute and speak up here. But why is the word radical used in math class? Okay, no math majors here. So it relates to square roots, and that's why I have a square root symbol on here, and a picture that I thought was just too interesting to not use for square roots that I actually saw from a tree box. But the idea is the word radical has been turned in political terms against people to represent something that are like fringe, extreme people that have crazy ideas or something. But the root of the word is that it means the root of things, and that's why it's used for square roots in math class. So in political terminology, radical means getting to the root of a problem. And so I would encourage you all to wear that label as radicals, because we are hopefully all people that wants to get to the root of a problem and actually fix it. And one of the things I think is actually radical in that sense is the principles of environmental justice that inform our movement in a lot of ways. They were put together by folks back in 1991 at the first National People of Color Environmental Leadership Summit in DC, which brought people together from all over the US and indigenous nations here and throughout the world. And I want to actually have everyone read through it together, because I think there's a lot in here that people don't usually surface in their work, and that is worth hearing again after these few decades since they were written. And there's a lot more in there than save the bunnies, trees, and whales. So if people can go ahead, I'm going to ask at this time, if you're willing to come off of mute and speak on any of the parts of the next few slides, drop your name into the chat, because I need 18 volunteers right now. So go ahead and take a moment to put your name in the chat if you're willing to help read this out loud so that we can all hear it in our own voices. Okay, I'm going to ask Jill, since you can see the chat, if you would go ahead and start reading from the first person. I'd like the first person to read the long one, that's the preamble here, and then the rest are much shorter. So go ahead and call through the list.
Excellent. Marcia, we're going to start with you, Marcia Ellis, and then when we get to number 1, it's going to come over to you, Preston, followed by Paula.
The 17 Principles of Environmental Justice. We, the people of color, gathered together at this multinational People of Color Environmental Leadership Summit to begin to build a national and international movement of all peoples of color to fight the destruction and taking of our lands and communities, do hereby reestablish our spiritual interdependence to the sacredness of our Mother Earth, to respect and celebrate each of our cultures, languages, and beliefs about the natural world and our roles in healing ourselves, to ensure environmental justice, to promote economic alternatives, which would contribute to the development of environmentally safe livelihoods, and to secure our political, economic, and cultural liberation that has been denied for over 500 years of colonization and oppression, resulting in the poisoning of our communities and land and the genocide of our peoples, do affirm and adopt these principles of environmental justice.
Thank you. Okay, whoever's next, go ahead to do number
Yeah,
one.
can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All right. So number one, environmental justice affirms the sacredness of Mother Earth, ecological unity, and the interdependence of all species, and the right to be free from ecological destruction.
Next.
Environmental justice demands that public policy be based on mutual respect and justice for all peoples, free from any form of discrimination or bias.
Tamela?
Environmental justice mandates the rights to ethical, balanced, and responsible uses of land and renewable resources in the interest of a sustainable planet for humans and other living things.
Sue, then Adrian.
Environmental justice calls for universal protection from nuclear testing, extraction, production, and disposal of toxic or hazardous wastes and poisons, and nuclear testing that threaten fundamental right to clean air, land, water, and food.
Environmental justice affirms the fundamental right to political, economic, cultural, and environmental self-determination of all peoples.
Yasmin, BP, then Anita.
We're at point 6, correct? Sorry, it's scrolled.
Yeah, sorry. Number 6.
Environmental justice demands the cessation of production of all toxins, hazardous waste, and radioactive materials, and that all past and current producers be held strictly accountable to the people for detoxification and the containment at the point of production.
BP, number 7.
Environmental justice demands the right to participate as equal partners at every level of decision-making, including needs assessment, planning, implementation, enforcement, and evaluation.
And Anita.
8, environmental justice affirms the right of all workers to a safe and healthy environment without being forced to choose between an unsafe livelihood and unemployment. It also affirms the right of those who work at home to be free from environmental hazards.
Thank you. Olivia, number 9.
Environmental justice protects the right of victims of environmental injustice to receive full compensation and reparations for damages, as well as quality health care. And vaccinations on people of color.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry,
no,
I jumped, I thought.
No,
My
you're
bad.
good. Okay, number 10, whoever's next.
10, we need some more volunteers.
Okay, yeah, more volunteers, and if we don't have them soon enough, just go back to the top of the list if you could.
Marcia, can you take number 10?
Sure. Number 10, environmental justice considers governmental acts of environmental injustice a violation of international law, the Universal Declaration on Human Rights, and the United Nations Convention on Genocide.
Thank you. Preston, could you take 11? Okay, BP, can you take 11? And then Nicole, number 12?
Environmental justice must recognize a special legal and natural relationship of Native peoples of the U.S. government through treaties, agreements, compacts, and covenants affirming sovereignty and self-determination.
Environmental justice affirms the need for urban and rural ecological policies to clean up and rebuild our cities and rural areas in balance with nature, honoring the cultural integrity of all our communities and provided fair access for all to the full range of resources.
Paula, could you take number 13? How about Tamela? Can you unmute?
Environmental justice calls for the strict enforcement of principles of informed consent and a halt to the testing of experimental reproductive and medical procedures and vaccinations on people of color.
Okay, that's 4.
Sue, could you take 14? And then Adrian, 15?
On it.
14, environmental justice opposes the destructive operations of multinational corporations.
Environmental justice opposes military occupation, repression, and exploitation of lands, peoples, and cultures, and other life forms.
And Mike, I'll let you take number 17.
Okay. Oh, there's still 16. You want to do
sorry.
16? Go ahead, do 16. I'll do 17.
All right. Environmental justice calls for the education of present and future generations, which emphasizes social and environmental issues based on our experience and an appreciation of our diverse cultural perspectives.
And 17, environmental justice requires that we as individuals make personal and consumer choices to consume as little of Mother Earth's resources and to produce as little waste as possible, and make the conscious decision to challenge and reprioritize our lifestyles to ensure the health of the natural world for present and future generations. So thank you everyone for helping read that. I like when people can put it in their own voice where possible. And I'd like to hear now, and just feel free to unmute and call out, what in here struck you as being outside the box of what you thought environmentalism was coming into this?
For me, I think the spiritual aspect is something that's usually not talked about very often when you're talking about environmentalism, like the interconnectedness of all things.
Okay. Good one, fair. What else?
Number 15, that opposes military occupation and repression and exploitation. That's not usually included in environmental concerns.
Absolutely. And the US military has been described many times as the largest polluter in the world, not to mention the impacts of war and all the pollution that comes with that, with burning oil fields and what we use military for to secure oil often, and gas and sometimes uranium. So a lot of connections there. What else?
The note on medical testing, I thought was not typically included in environmental concerns.
Yeah, and this one, it's interesting to see how not dated this still is. There are still cases in recent years where people in prison in California, was the last time I read about it, women were being forcibly sterilized in prison. So that is still an ongoing thing that people are pushing back on. What else jumped out at you?
Maybe workers' rights.
Yeah, workers' rights. And there have been whole intersectional movements that have tried to come together around just transition, around, I'm trying to remember what Tony Mazaki's formation was called, but they had basically a labor and environmental coalition that they were building years ago around that. But oftentimes it's labor and environmentalists being pit against each other in divisive ways. Anything else that jumped out to anyone? All right, let me ask a different question. What in here that you see, like, where is the onus being put? Who's responsible for making change to get environmental justice? Jump around among these so you can see some reminders.
Well,
A lot seems to be on the go. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
You're saying the government? Is that what I was hearing?
Yeah, I was going to say government. Yeah.
Okay. So that's one of the dominant institutions of our time. What else? Here's a clue on number 14.
In the chat, we've got corporations and policies.
So we got corporations that are the dominant institution of our time, controlling our government. The military is our government, but also corporations being private, a lot of privatization and companies involved in driving the militarism. So if you look through these, a lot of these are pointing to government and corporations. Number 7 is all about decision making. And so that's like the democracy plank, basically. And so what makes number 17 different from the first 16?
I would say all the others are the collective is trying to force change, bring about change, whereas this one is individuals.
Exactly. So understanding what I had learned that is basically what turned into this presentation in the earlier parts of it. And then looking at these principles years ago, I put 2 and 2 together and I was wondering, did they intentionally put individual change as just one of 17 principles and as the last one in order to de-emphasize it? And when I talked to a couple of the people who were actually involved in writing these, I found out that I was right, that was intentional. And so that spoke to me in that it's saying that environmental justice is about primarily making making institutional change and prioritizing that over focusing on individuals. And that, I think, is what in part makes this a radical document, one that gets to the root of a problem and just should inform our activism in a lot of ways. So let me leave it there. Here's where you can find some of the stuff written up in an article I did years ago that describes the whole Keep America Beautiful Ad Council thing. And feel free to screen capture my contact info, but I'll also drop it into the chat so I can stop the screen sharing.